Welcome to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast, where we help women struggling with recurrent pregnancy loss by sharing stories of hope and interviews with experts in the field of fertility and miscarriage. If you want to download our free lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, you will go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to download your free checklist. If you want to connect with others going through recurrent miscarriage, please check out our show notes for a link to our Facebook group. Now I'm going to hand it over to your host, Laura Bowder, for today's episode.
Welcome back to the Miscarriage Hope Desk Podcast. Today we have Jennifer Robertson with us. She is a fertility coach and she's also the author of the book, The Injustice of Infertility. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I'd like to start with giving you a chance to tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background and what led you to write your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the proud, and I'll start with this first, I'm the proud mum of two little babies who did not come easy and they led me down this path. But I am your typical type A personality. I am a control freak, very process driven, practical person. And I'd lived my whole life this way. And then when infertility came and knocked on my door, when my husband and I just got married and we decided to start for a baby on our honeymoon, I just figured it would happen. And then when it didn't happen, I just figured I would use my own, what I had done so far in my whole life to get where I was to produce a baby. And so I tried and tried and tried, and it didn't work for me. And it was very frustrating. So just in a nutshell, in terms of our fertility journey, I spent 7 years trying to create the family that I had pictured so fondly in my head since I was a little girl. And our story included so many ups and downs that I never imagined possible. And I never imagined that I would actually be able to do, that I would actually be able to survive. And when, as you mentioned, my book, The Injustice of Infertility, when I wrote that and sat down and wrote down everything that I'd been through, it was just absolutely mind-blowing. So my husband and I spent about a year trying to conceive naturally. It didn't happen, so we were referred to IVF, went down the path of IVF, and then they discovered that I wasn't developing a lining on my uterus. So we spent the next year doing absolutely everything you can imagine to try to do that, to try to thicken the lining. And then eventually our fertility specialist said to us, the only way that you're going to have your own baby is via a surrogate, which was heartbreaking because obviously, as I said, I'm a control freak, and I'd imagined being pregnant my whole life. Yeah. I'd been able to picture it and feel it. And that was just the one thing. And by then we'd been trying for so long, I was craving it. It was this desperation that I needed to have a child. Not that I desired to have a child, I needed to have a child. And so that was really devastating, but we were lucky enough that my sister-in-law put her hand up and said that she would have a baby for us. So then we went down the path of surrogacy, and we thought that it would happen straight away, but it didn't. So we spent the next 2 years putting not only ourselves, but also her through 9 IVF cycles. And we finally got to the stage where she was pregnant. And that's the first time we'd ever seen 2 lines on a stick before. Well, actually, we didn't see the 2 lines, she did. But it was just this amazing feeling. And we were like, excellent, it's over. And then she suffered a miscarriage. And that is something that I had never experienced that, obviously. My sister had had 2 miscarriages previously. So I'd kind of been exposed to it then, but until you actually go through it, it's just a concept in your head and you don't really get it.
Right.
So that was really, obviously it was tough to tackle, but we were grieving and she was grieving and we were grieving that we'd put her through that. So it was just this really bizarre situation that we'd gotten ourselves into. Like my husband and I were just so devastated that we couldn't support her and we had no idea what she was going through. So we kind of retreated into our our own corners. And I feel really, and today I feel really bad that we weren't able to support her and ask her, how are you going? Because we were just trying to pull ourselves up. And so we kept on moving. And at that point, we were terrified that she wouldn't want to do it again. And I would completely understand if she didn't, but she was a trooper. She was determined like we were, and she kept on going. And a couple of cycles later, she felt pregnant again. And it was this elation mixed with this terror. You know, you can't fully feel excited because you're just waiting for it to be ripped away from you again. And so it wasn't until that first, like the 3-month ultrasound, that we actually saw our baby, saw the heartbeat, that we allowed ourselves to feel, you know, that little bit of excitement. And, you know, the next 6 months after that were bizarre again, because we were growing a baby, but I wasn't growing a baby inside of me. And so it was this mixture of terror and pleasure and guilt and you know, loss, that I wasn't able to feel all of the things that I wanted to, but also gratitude and all of those different things. So eventually we got through it, and she had a baby boy for us. So Luca is now 6. And 2 months later, I fell pregnant naturally. So after a board of directors said that there is no way that this woman can have a baby herself physically, there I was. So I had this newborn baby in my arms. I was pregnant, which was just completely bizarre. You know, I'd never seen 2 lines on a stick before myself, and here we were. So, and do you know what? I don't remember feeling a whole lot of fear in that. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was fear of I had a newborn baby, that I was, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. And here I was pregnant again. And so we just kind of went through it. And at I think it was 9, we went for a scan at 9 weeks, and at 9 weeks they said, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat there. And for me, you know, I guess I was pissed off. I was really pissed off, because we had gotten off our fertility roller coaster. By that stage, we'd been out for 5 years. So it took us 5 years to get our little boy. And we decided, even though we wanted 2 children at the beginning, well, he was it, you know, and we were thankful for that. And then all of a sudden we had this little ray of hope that, oh my goodness, we can have 2 children now, which is what we wanted. And then, so we got that hope, and then we were booted off the fertility roller coaster again. And I was angry. I don't think I've ever been so angry in my life. I just was like at the injustice of it all. And so, and, you know, and I think back to my miscarriage, and the medical system fails us so badly. And I remember sitting in emergency, and I was with all of the other people who were sick. And I had to tell my story over and over to every single doctor who came into the cubicle. And I'm laying in between people who have broken legs, or who are, you know, coughing up a lung. And I'm like, I'm not sick. I'm having a miscarriage. And they were so insensitive. And I'd spent a couple of hours there by myself having a miscarriage. And then they were like, okay, well, there's nothing that we can do for you right now. You're going to have to come back to our fertility or our miscarriage clinic a couple of days later. And, you know, I think, you know, while we're talking about the miscarriage part of it, I think one of the things is that we have in our mind that it's going to be quick, that you have a miscarriage and it's just going to be over. Man, that it hung around for weeks and weeks and weeks, and scan after scan, and it wouldn't pass. And so eventually I had to get some drugs that would induce it. And, you know, it was just really sad. And it makes me angry just going back and thinking about how I was treated and how I felt at that point in time as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we can delve into that a little bit deeper about, you know, what we actually really need when we're having a miscarriage. But
Absolutely.
so I picked myself up, you know, and at that point, and I kind of look back now and think maybe not that I needed it, but I experienced that because I'd never experienced a miscarriage before. So I really didn't know what our surrogate, my sister-in-law, had gone through. And now I did. And so I was like, wow, how did she do that? Like, she did that for another human being. You know, it wasn't even her own baby that she lost, but I'm sure she went through all of the emotional side of things, plus a whole lot more with the guilt as well.
Sure.
So I used her as inspiration. You know, I used her as inspiration. I was like, you know what, if she can do it, and if she could get herself back up and keep moving forward, I can do it again. So I did it, and lo and behold, 6 months later, we fell pregnant again, and now we have Sophie, who is 4 years old. So just this huge, and I must admit, you know, that pregnancy, it was very different. It was very different to how I had pictured it, because I'd had so much trauma and loss leading up to it that I never could really embrace it, that I could never really breathe and take that breath and go, okay, this is it. This is what I've always dreamed of. Because in my dream, there wasn't the fear attached to it. In my dream, there was just the pure joy and excitement. There wasn't any fear. So it was very different. And I don't want to sound ungrateful, but this is the thing that we go through when we've experienced miscarriage, loss, infertility, or anything like that. When we do fall pregnant, it doesn't just go away. The fear, the grief, all of that doesn't just go away. We carry it with us that whole pregnancy, and you can't really breathe until you get your baby in your arms. And then even then, it's still that. You know, I still look at my babies when they're asleep, and I call them my babies. You know, as I said, they're 6 and 4, but I still look at them and go, is this going to be taken from me? You know, I just don't think that it goes away. I know that we work out ways to deal with it. And I know a lot of it, you know, and this is what I teach in my coaching practice, a lot of it is mindset. Absolutely. It's the story that we're telling ourselves in our head, but it is still this undertone that kind of follows us throughout, which, you know, we can use it. We can absolutely use it to our advantage as well, because then we can switch it. So now when I look at them and I have that fear of, is this going to be taken away from me? I can see the struggles that I went through and go, wow, I am so grateful that this is where I am right now, because I know that my story is very special and my journey is very special. And that's what got us where we are today.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I completely relate to those feelings. And I mean, I remember exactly what that feels like, you know, to go through a loss and then to be so excited and then immediately to feel like, okay, well, when is it going to be taken away? Yeah, it really, I mean, it takes something from that experience that if you haven't experienced a loss, and then, you know, I feel like it's just a very different pregnancy experience. So,
yeah, and it's something that, like, it annoys me. It really does piss me off, because we all deserve to have that beautiful pregnancy, and we can. There are ways that we can experience that beautiful pregnancy without fear consuming us. But I think that anxiety kind of always follows us a little bit on the journey as well.
Well, it made me think about, you know, what we were saying. Maybe you have some thoughts about what we really need when we're going through a loss, because, you know, I had a very similar experience to what you were describing too, like having to go to the emergency room, waiting around, having them say, okay, well, we can't really do anything, so go home and see what happens. And like there's no support in the way, at least not in my experience, there was no support in the way of like, hey, maybe you might want to check into some counseling or coaching, or here's a resource on what to expect, or anything along those lines. So I don't know if you
Yeah,
have any thoughts on that.
I remember they gave me a whole heap of pamphlets and things like that. And at that stage, I was like, I'm not going to read a pamphlet on how to get through a miscarriage. I needed to talk to someone, you know, who had been through it before, and I needed to feel like it was okay, that it was okay that I had experienced it. And you know, I'm sure a lot on this podcast, we all speak about it, is this guilt of what did I do wrong? And you go through everything in your mind of what it was, and understanding now that there is very little that you can do to actually cause your own miscarriage. But it is about not blaming yourself, but, just trying to sit in it. And we don't want to sit in it, like we minimize it so much. And I remember at the time I would say to myself, well, it wasn't a real baby, like lucky it happened now. And they're the things that people were saying to me, but I was saying it in my head as well, because I was trying to minimize it. And I felt like if I actually looked at it as I lost a baby, then it would consume me and take me over. But what I know now is that, yes, it was a baby, and these are real feelings, and we do need support, and we do need to talk about it. And the more we talk about it, the less shame there is around it, the more we are able to process it. Because I'm reading this book at the moment called Emotional Agility, and it's about the types of people that you are and how you deal with emotions and grief and things like that. And miscarriage is one of the, like it's the heaviest, I think, where grief is concerned, because it's not like people know how to support you. It's not like you know how to support yourself. If a loved one dies, there's a funeral, there are social etiquettes, your friends bring you casseroles, whereas with a miscarriage, they don't know how to support you. So this emotional agility it describes the two types of people, and it's the bottlers, so the people who just push it down and just kind of push it down, yes. And what happens is that eventually it catches up, and it's called emotional leakage, and something will happen. You'll drop your keys, and then all of a sudden it will all come out, and you have no idea, and all of a sudden you're sitting there crying over your lost keys, and you're thinking, I'm a little bit crazy right now, like I'm a little bit unhinged, and you think that it's you, whereas it's because you've been bottling it up. And same with if you've suffered multiple miscarriages as well, if you keep on pushing them down, what will happen is when you do grieve the miscarriage, you're not grieving one, you're grieving however many you've had before that as well. And so it's a lot harder to dive into it. So there's the bottler, and then there's also the brooder as well. So the person who pushes it down, but it's like this hurricane, and they put stories around it as to, it happened because I'm a terrible person. It happened because I'm not meant to be a mom. It happened, like we put all of these stories around it, and then we talk to other people, but in a sense of why me, it's not like that healthy sort. So we're actually it's just spinning around and around. And that's where the largest amount of anger can come out, because you've just brooded on it so much. Same with if you have a fight with your husband or something like that, and you have the fight, and then you walk out of the room, and then all of a sudden, like, you are just stewing and stewing and stewing, and it doesn't go away. And the next time you see him, he might say something nice to you, and you'll snap at him because you've been brooding on it all day, and then all of a sudden you can't have a sensible conversation. So, you've got the bottler, you've got the brooder, and then you've got the person who actually, not accepts it, but just is able to process it in a healthy way by speaking about it. And I think that we all need to be able to learn how to do that in order to get through miscarriage and trauma and infertility and all of the heavy emotions that come with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like you mentioned, that there's no social etiquette, there's no protocol for what people are supposed to do, and that's if you even tell them. Like, depending on how far along you are, I know that there are plenty of people that I'm sure are going through a loss and not telling anybody about it.
And that's the thing. Why is there the rule? And I do understand it, but the rule of this unwritten rule, you don't tell people until you're 3 months along. And so you don't tell people. And then what happens is when if you miscarry in those 3 months, like, they don't know. And so, we've been groomed that we don't want to jinx it or anything like that, or we just want to hide it for the first 3 months, because if something goes wrong, we don't want to have to tell them. And so, you know, we're already perpetuating that cycle by saying, I'm not going to tell anyone for the first 3 months. We're already saying, if something goes wrong, I'm going to bottle that inside as well. So we almost set ourselves up for it. So who says that we shouldn't be able to scream from the rooftops within that 3 months, I am pregnant? And that way, if something does happen, then we're able to get the support. So I guess it's two camps. Do you not?
Right.
And it's kind of annoying and frustrating that we feel like we need to hide it for the first 3 months, because if something goes wrong, we don't want to have to, you know, apologize to our friends and go, I'm sorry, I got you so excited, but it's not going to happen now. Or to your mother-in-law, I'm sorry, you're not going to be a grandmother, you know, anymore. And why do we feel like we have to apologize to them? It's happening to our body.
No, it's such a good question. And I think that it's probably like we have this rule because we don't want to make all the other people uncomfortable. You know, we wouldn't want everyone to be upset. And that's really just, like you said, that just goes back to like, it must be my fault. I don't want to have to upset others. And I think that's why we all need counseling or coaching if we're going through something like this, because it can be so easy to internalize those things and be the bottler or the brooder in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm wondering also, because I know that we talked a little bit even before we were recording about, so my experience with loss, you know, it was my first pregnancy. I didn't have any other children. What have you seen either like in your experience with the coaching clients that you have, or in your own experience because you had a loss when you had a child? Like, are there differences in the way that people process that, or even just in the way they kind of present that to others? Because we've had some conversations too about like, well, I should be grateful for what I have, like all of those competing emotions come into play. And I wonder if that comes into play more for women that maybe already have a child or children and then experience loss versus someone who doesn't have children yet.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
Yes.
Can we cut this a little bit out? Is that okay? Yep.
Yeah, it's fine. I guess I'm just trying to think of like comparing the experience of a pregnancy loss, because like I only know my own experience, which was I didn't have any other children yet. So first of all, I could just take my time and do my own thing to kind of get through that. I didn't have to care for another child, versus maybe getting the message like if you have a have a child or children and then experience a loss, like is that additional kind of pressure from others to be like, well, just be grateful for what you have?
Yeah, look, I think that there is always pressure no matter what. And we put that pressure on ourselves. You know, if you, and, you know, is a miscarriage harder with children or without? It like it's one of these things, it hurts no matter what.
Absolutely.
And ranking our pain is a big no-no. You know, like there will always be someone who is worse off. There will always be someone who has suffered 5 miscarriages and you've only suffered 2. Like it just doesn't matter. You know, this situation and infertility doesn't matter whether you've been on the journey 1 year, 10 years, it hurts no matter what. But of course there's different things that go through your mind. You know, when for us, when we didn't have any children beforehand, and when our surrogate Renee had a miscarriage, we were able to go away and deal with it without all of the white noise and everything like that. But we also had that fear of, I don't have anything else. Is this it for us? Was this it? Was this our one chance to have a baby? And now it's gone. So there was the fear of, this is it for us, you know, like this is never going to happen again. In that same idea, it still did give us hope, you know. And I speak about in my book, I speak about, you know, the lowest points in our fertility journey actually gave us the most hope, because every miscarriage I had was this thing inside of me clicked and went, oh, I can do this. I can do this. So, when we had a miscarriage, when I had Luca, man, that was a whole different raft of emotions, because I couldn't go away and deal with it. I still had to show up every single day. And that's what happens when you have a miscarriage, when you already have children, you still have to show up. You still have to put on that brave face for your children, or you feel like you need to, because they're going to ask questions that are too painful for you to answer. And how do you explain to a child, no matter how old they are, that this has happened? So there's that, but there is also extra guilt that's put on that of, I might not be able to give my existing child a sibling, or like there are all different aspects, and it's all stories that we really play in our head. We are so mean to ourselves, we really are. And I think the commonalities between miscarriage, whether you have it with children or without, is that you always take on the guilt from it. And I think that is something that we really need to work through, that it is not, it's not your fault. It's not your burden to carry all alone. And it's not something that you did.
Definitely. So what is that process like, as far as reframing some of that? Like, does it start with something simple, like just noticing that you are having those thoughts, and then, from there you can start to work through challenging them, changing them, that kind of thing?
Yes. Awareness of anything, like you can't fix anything or solve anything or move through anything unless you're aware of it. And a lot of the time our minds are just like just powerful. Like it's just so powerful. You should have a license to operate it. But a lot of the time we don't even know what's going on in the background, because we're not aware of it. And it's this internal loop of these ideas and beliefs that have been going on in your mind forever. And I'll give you an example of it. When I was trying to fall pregnant all of those years, I had in the back of my mind, where I didn't realize it, and it was from, I was raised by a single mom of 3 children, and it looked hard. It looked so hard. Like she sacrificed everything. So my internal dialogue was, it takes a lot of hard work to raise children. You have to give up everything. You can really screw up your kids. Like I was scared. I was actually scared of falling pregnant, but I had no idea that was going on in the background. And so this is the thing that, we have to be aware of what's happening. And what I say to like all of my coaching clients, and what I have to continually say to myself, like these are the skills that you use in life in general. What is the story that I'm telling myself about this? And a lot of the time, this journey is painful, and I am never advocating, I'll just do an affirmation, or just do a mantra, or just be grateful, or just be, positive, or just be hopeful, or whatever. It's just not possible, and it's not healthy. And every time you just say just, like that's just, I just said it again. it's impossible. So it's a matter of looking at the story that you're putting around it. I had a miscarriage. This is painful. And then stopping it before you get to the point of the story. This means that I'm not meant to be a mom. Everyone else can do it, but I can't. My body's a failure. These are all of the stories that we put around it. And a lot of the time, we're not even conscious of it. It just is going in a loop in the background. So a great exercise for people to do is just sit down and just be conscious of what the hell is going on. You're feeling like shit. Sit down with a piece of paper and just write it down. What am I telling myself about this? What is it? What is the story that I'm playing? Why am I feeling like this? Because if you dig down deep enough, you'll get to the story. And once you know the story, you can actually look at it and go, okay, is this true or is this not? And a lot of the time on my journey, I thought that the reason why this wasn't happening for us, and the reason why I had to fight so hard and go down the path of surrogacy, in the back of my mind, there was a little voice saying, you're not worthy of becoming a mother. And I know that that's bullshit now. Like that was in the back of my mind for 7 years. I know I'm not, because I know that I'm an amazing mom. And so that was the story. And so we waste so much power and so much energy. And that is why we feel so exhausted on this journey,
Mm-hmm.
because of the story that we're telling ourselves constantly on loop. And unless we can see that story, and unless we can just look at it and acknowledge it and go, you know what, it's just not true. And until we can do that and let go of those unhelpful thoughts, then that's where we find the release and the lightness to be able to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's such a good point. And it's interesting to think about that, there are thoughts in the back of our heads that we aren't even consciously aware of. And so I appreciate, the space to kind of point that out and then just think about what can we do. We can sit down, actually think, write it out, take a look at it, and see if it's true. And it's not true.
No, it's not true. And that's not it's not an easy thing to do. A
No.
lot of us are just we look out there for something external. What's the solution? What's the tablet? What, let me do acupuncture, let me do go for fertility massage, let me take the tea, let me do this. The inner work, it's the hardest thing, but it is the most important thing. And that is what I've come to realize, not just from writing my book, but from coaching and also from my own life as well, because these things just don't go away. Like these thoughts and these negative beliefs that we've developed since we were kids, they just don't go away. Like we need to be conscious of them. And it's a process, it's not something that's easy at all, but it is something that every one of us should really be doing just to exist in this life.
Mm-hmm. So what led you down the path of writing the book? Like how did you make the jump then from, okay, I've had these experiences and now I'm going to write this book? Because I really think the title, like, it just really gets right to the core feeling of it, right? Is like it stops before the story. It's just, this is not fair. And I think we have all felt like that.
Yes, absolutely. Look, it took me a while to get to the point. I didn't appreciate how amazing my story was.
Mm-hmm.
It was just something that we went through, we endured to get to where we were. But what
Yeah.
happened for me was, and I always wanted to be a writer. I'm a big fan of Sex and the City. So I look at Carrie Bradshaw and I'd be like, yeah, that's who I want to be.
Yes.
and but it's funny. I never really thought about my fertility story as being the story that I could tell,
Mm.
and it wasn't until I started telling people about my journey, and they would meet Luca, and they would just assume that he was just he is a regular boy, but they would just assume that our path to pregnancy was just kind of normal. And then I would tell them my story, and they'd just start crying. And I had always had a huge amount of shame around what we had to go through
Mm-hmm.
about our story. And when they thought that it was beautiful, I was like, oh, maybe it is kind of beautiful. And it wasn't until I sat down. And so that was the thing that kind of pushed me to do it. I guess it was for a few reasons as well. Number one, the main reason is for people who are in this community, who are going through this as well, because
Yeah.
you feel so isolated. And our story had this amazing happy ending, and it was, I don't know, I can't explain. It's just amazing. And so I wrote it for women who are on the journey, who have feel like they're alone, who feel like they just can't go any further, and feel like it's just them and the thoughts that go through their mind. And I want it to be an honest account, and it is
Mm-hmm.
brutally honest. I go through the deep, dark, shameful thoughts that I had every step of the way. And the feedback has been absolutely amazing. Like women are messaging me going, oh my God, this is the book that I needed to read Thank you so much. So that was on one hand. The second reason was for my kids as well. I just wanted them to know that, not just that we'd fought so hard to them, so they need to be bloody grateful, but also because, you know, we had loved them and we had searched for them and we had fought for them every second of that journey. So it's a beautiful story for them, but it was also for me. I had never grieved. I was the bottler.
Mhm.
Actually, I was a combination between the bottler and the brooder. And so I didn't deal with anything. I was so detached. It was just a business transaction that we were doing. This is just what I had to do to get through. And so I never dealt with anything. So I
Yeah.
wanted to write it for me as well. And it was one of the toughest things, not, you know, besides actually living through it, but going back there and grieving
Mhm.
the process as well. And it took me 2 years to write because I had to pick it up and put it down and pick it up and put
Yeah.
it down. But I kept on diving and diving and diving. And it's not until my husband said to me the other day, he's like, after he'd read the book, he was like, wow, I forgot that we went through so much shit. And you do. Like, you
Mhm.
don't acknowledge how hard this is when you're on it, because you keep on just running. And that's what we do. We don't acknowledge this is hard and this is why we feel like this. And that is okay, because for some of us, this will be the biggest thing that you'll ever go through in your life, the
Mhm.
hardest thing that you'll ever go through in your life. And up until that stage, you know, I'd lost my father to cancer, I'd lost my grandmother, you know, but this period, like infertility, miscarriage, the quest for motherhood, that search, by far the hardest thing that I'd ever gone through. And so yeah, now I have a book, and that's why I became a fertility coach as well, because I know exactly what it's like. I know how hard it is, and I know exactly what I needed on this journey as well. I needed someone who would stand beside me, hold my hand, and go, you got this, and it's okay if you don't do this perfectly. Actually, it's better than okay. This was never meant to be perfect. Just,
Yeah.
it's messy. Embrace the messiness, get through it one day at a time, and we can do it together. And that's the most important thing. I think that's the most important thing that I needed on my fertility journey to get through it as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think like that is just further proof, right? That when you share your story, that is how, you know, you process it and heal from it. And whether it's through writing a book or just journaling for yourself or speaking to a coach or a counselor or a friend or a family member, um, whatever feels right for you and the way that you process. But I think the most important thing is to process it and to share it so that, you know, you don't feel alone and then other women don't feel alone, because I'm sure we've all had the experience too of sharing, you know, oh, I went through this loss, and then hearing like five other people, you know, coming out of the woodwork saying, oh yeah, that happened to me too, and we don't know because we
Yes.
don't talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it needs to be one of these subjects that is no longer a taboo. And that's, you know, I think all of us in this community, that's what we're trying to do, is pave the way for those who are walking behind us, so it's not so hard.
Yeah, exactly. So remind us of the name of the book and then let us know where we can connect with you online.
Yes, so it is called The Injustice of Infertility. It is available for sale at all places online that you can get good books from. You can also jump over onto my website as well for an easy link to get to it, and also the other services that I provide as well. So my website is www.jenniferrobertson.co, not .com. And also I'm on Pinterest, I'm on Facebook, but where I hang out the most is on Instagram. And my Instagram handle is Ms. Jennifer Robertson. So you can find me over there, and my inbox is always open as well. And I think we spoke a little bit earlier as well about a group coaching program that I'm in the
Mm-hmm.
process of creating as well, for women who are now pregnant after miscarriage and infertility, because that level of anxiety and fear skyrockets as soon as you get that positive pregnancy test. So yeah, I'm in the process of developing a group coaching program to support women through the 9 months so that they can actually enjoy their pregnancy as well, rather than just see it as a race to the finish line.
Yes, so it's so needed. So all of that information will be linked in our show notes. And Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our show notes for details on joining our Facebook group and for following along on Instagram. If you would like a free recurrent pregnancy loss lab checklist, go to miscarriagehopedesk.com/labs. Again, that's miscarriagehopedesk.com/LABS to get your free downloadable checklist. And for even more resources, visit the Miscarriage Hope Desk website, where we have stories of hope plus an entire library of evidence-based research articles related to fertility and miscarriage. If you enjoyed this episode, I would so appreciate it if you rate, reviewed, and subscribed to the Miscarriage Hope Desk podcast. Your ratings and reviews will help others to find us. I want to wrap up by saying that if you are going through a miscarriage, my heart goes out to you, and as difficult as your experience may be, I want you to know that you are not alone and that you will find a path forward.